All right, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for this webinar on protecting program open space. I'll turn over to Delegate Boyce to give us our welcome.
Good afternoon. Happy Monday. I am Delegate Regina T. Boyce, Vice Chair of the House Environment and Transportation Committee, and certainly honored to be the Subcommittee Chair for the Natural Resources, Agriculture, and Open Spaces Subcommittee. Welcome to this webinar on Program Open Space, a vital initiative profoundly impacting the quality of life for all Marylanders. Program Open Space is a commitment to community well-being, preserving and enhancing natural resources. It's more than just environmental, it's an investment in Maryland's economic future. Program Open Space, as you know, funded by homeowners and landowners, plays a key role in acquiring and developing these spaces, fostering community well-being, and preserving natural resources. The success of Maryland's land preservation programs, including Program Open Space, is attributed to its dedicated funding sources. This funding is essential for local governments, like for me from Baltimore City, to acquire and develop parks, acting as an economic driver and enhancing rural economies through recreation. Parks and open spaces are vital for Marylanders, contributing to improved quality of life, economic prosperity, and environmental sustainability. Primary goal of the program: conserve an acre of land for every acre developed, benefiting state parks, forests, and natural resource management areas. Financed by 0.5% of the state's property transfer tax collected from homeowners and landowners. Program Open Space has acquired over 353,000 acres. I invite you to explore the intricacies of Program Open Space in this webinar, discovering how, through program, we can shape a greener, healthier, and more vibrant Maryland. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to an insightful discussion. Owen?
Great. Thank you so much for those beautiful words. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today on this webinar for the background of Program Open Space and all the benefits that it brings to our communities. My name is Owen Bailey. I am the co-chair of Partners for Open Space and the Director of Land Use and Policy for the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. A couple of housekeeping items before we get into our presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and we will post it online and send you a link later this week, along with the presentations that you're about to see. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat. We will get to questions at the end of the program after the presentations. So first up, we have Ann Jones, is the Director of Partners for Open Space. She will be speaking on the history of the program, how the funds are collected, and the Rural Legacy Program. Ann?
Okay, thank you very much. And I think that really Delegate Boyce said, most of what needs to be said, so we could probably just, all stop right now. But I guess we'll get into a few more details. There's a lot of program open space, Partners Open Space, but Partners for Open Space is a statewide coalition, and we work together to try to secure, save, protect, and hopefully sometime enhance Maryland's land conservation programs. Okay, Owen, next one. Owen's got to change my slides for me because I'm too slow for this, I've always liked this quote, and this is a quote from 2014 from Dan Rodericks in The Sun, but I think it explains the program as well as anything. It says, Program Open Space has a dedicated funding source, a 0.5% tax on real estate transfers. It's a smart program, a legacy of Maryland's progressive approach to conservation built on a simple idea: take a tiny piece of the revenue from each real estate transaction and fund a program to save open space, buy development rights for Maryland's family farmers so they can keep farming, acquire land for state parks, and send money to Baltimore and our smaller cities and the counties so they can build playgrounds, bike trails, and lacrosse and soccer fields. The logic is beautiful, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think if you tried to come up with a program again, it would actually be very similar to the way this is. Okay, Owen, next slide. Real briefly, and people will go into this in more detail, but the transfer tax funds stateside program open space, local side program open space, the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, which is MALF, the Rural Legacy Program, Heritage Areas, the Next Generation Farmers Program, direct grants to Baltimore City, and new in the block and not in this slide, and it should be, is the Green Space Equity Program. And then a significant chunk goes to DNR for operations. So as you can see, that 0.5%, while it's a small percent of the purchase price of a home goes to fund a lot of programs. Okay, next one. Real brief history. It was established in 1968, and it was really the first of its kind in the nation for two things. One of it was for the purchase of agricultural easements, and the second one was because of the dedicated source of funding, which you're going to hear that a lot. But as you all know in the legislature, it is very difficult if you do not have a dedicated source of funding to have anything continue to be successful. And it generates more revenue when the real estate market is hot and less revenue when it cools. So it's kind of a self-balancing program. And we'll talk about how that's kind of hitting us this year again, because as everybody knows, the real estate market is not where it was a few years ago. It also comes in as cash. And when it comes in cash, because of the competitive, go back a couple more, sorry. Because of the competitive, the fact that there are many competing needs for the funds that come in, from 2002 to 2018, $1.4 billion were diverted to other purposes. And everybody realized that's hurting us. That's hurting the long term. Think of what that 1.4 billion could have bought over those years when the real estate was less, and how much more we could have preserved, how many more parks, how many more playgrounds. So in 2016, partners worked together with legislators to mandate a full return to cash funding and a repayment of $800,000. That repayment had a schedule on it, and part of the things that occurred was with the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, that schedule was compressed a little bit, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but it was to be repaid over a number of years. Okay, next one. And as you all, again, budgets are a snapshot in time. Everybody does their best to say, hey, this is what we think the revenue is going to be. So one of the things that greatly affects the funding for these programs is something called underattainment and overattainment. Now, if the real estate market was just a nice little gentle thing that went along, this wouldn't be a problem. But what happens is everybody makes their best estimate of what it's going to be, what is going to come in through the transfer tax. So if the budget projections are overly optimistic, and then in the future years, the amount that comes into the programs is reduced, and that's happening in FY25. There's a reduction because in FY23, there was an assumption that the markets would be higher than they are now, the real estate market. Then there's also something called overattainment, and that means that when people project, they were overly pessimistic, and that happened big time at the beginning of COVID, because everybody thought the budget was going to tank. I mean, not the budget, that the housing market was going to tank. The housing market did not tank. In fact, it went up. And so the allocations were increased for FY23 and FY24 because basically you're repaid for the overattainment. We got more money than we thought we were going to get. Next one. These are just a couple quotes. And again, I'd just like to show that the support for the land preservation programs, one of the joy of working in this, and I have really been privileged to work for this over the years, is that it is a nonpartisan issue. It has been zeroed out by Democratic and Republican governors, and it has been fully funded by Democratic and Republican governors. And you all can read the quotes here, but one that I like is former Governor Robert Ehrlich, who, by the way, zeroed out the funds during his administration, said when he was asked what the biggest mistake of the past 30 years was, he said, diversion of hundreds of millions of dollars from program open space into the state's general fund has meant less money to acquire and preserve environmentally sensitive and threatened land. And, you see that there is tremendous support for the programs. And it is just, like I say, delightful to work on a nonpartisan issue like this. Next slide. And I'm going to just briefly talk about the Rural Legacy Program now, because that's actually what I have been working in since it started in 1998 up in Baltimore County. There are 35 rural legacy areas throughout the state, and they work in partnership with both nonprofit land trusts. So they're the only program, pretty much the only program that can work directly with your local land trust, who are the boots on the ground, who know the people, who know the properties, who can go out to their neighbors and say, hey, are you interested in preserving your land? They look at areas that are rich in multiple resources. So they're going to look at how's the farmland, how's the forest land, how's the streams, how's the historic preservation, how's the natural resources. And all of these areas are ranked accordingly. And through this, you create landscape scale conservation. And again, as an example, in Baltimore County, in the areas where I work, we've now got 22,000 contiguous acres. And it's all the programs working together. But when you have something like the Rural Legacy Program, it doesn't mean that it's funding all of the preservation in that area, but it certainly puts a spotlight on it. And it leads a lot of property owners. They may come into mouth, they may donate easements, but they know that that area is something that the state has said is special and needs to be preserved. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Owen. Are you going back with it?
Yes, thank you so much, Ann. That was great. Our next speaker is Charlotte Davis. Charlotte is the Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council, as well as my co-chair with Partners for Open Space. Charlotte, you're up.
So great. Thanks, Owen. Happy to be here to talk about program open space and the support for, and now I can't advance. Oh, there you go. Okay. For the program, predominantly, POS as a whole supports two important economic sectors, primarily tourism and then agriculture. So all of the programs pretty much support economic development opportunities throughout rural Maryland. The Ag Land Preservation Foundation and the Next Generation Farmland Acquisition Program both support economic development for agriculture and profitability, as well as transitioning our farms for the next generation of farmers. And we have two issues that we're concerned about in the future. One is just ensuring access to water, particularly around the state, and then making sure that we are taking care of our existing resources and stewarding our land. So the heritage areas, as well as the state parks, are important tourism drivers for the whole state. The Department of Commerce issued a report showing that the number of visitors to our state is growing, 35.2 million in 2021, and that spending can reach $16.4 billion, for that visitor experience. You'll see the total economic impact of 26.4 billion. That's including both indirect and induced impacts, and it supports 173,700 jobs throughout the state. So we think the heritage areas in our state parks, and including our local parks, are important economic drivers throughout the state. For the farmland, we are seeing such significant development pressure all across the state, but the resource-based industries are important to all of us. Last time I checked, we all like to eat. We all like to eat 3 times a day. So it's important that we've got land available for those activities. Half of our land area is comprised of privately owned rural working land, but it's important to our heritage, our culture, and our overall quality of life. But these industries underpin almost many of the rural economies across the state. But we've got some challenges in agriculture as well. We got an aging workforce. We've got this loss of working land. And this lack of access to available and affordable business capital for farmers is a challenge. But as we've all long said, stealing this from Chairman Mac Middleton, the best ag land preservation program is a profitable farm. We don't have to spend any money on that. So MALF and the Next Generation Farmland Program are incredibly important to make sure that we've got available land for our farming activities. This is agriculture at a glance. You'll see how much, 1,990,000, 117 acres in farms. We've got a little under 12,500 farms. Love to see that increase, but it's aging. You'll see the average age is 57 years old, and so we need to have available land so that we can have that next generation be able to farm in Maryland. This is some more farmland stats for you. If you really want to know more about it, I'm always happy to share information. And then just want to give a little bit information about the Marbigco program of the Next Generation Farmland Acquisition Program. This has also been funded with payback dollars of program Open Space, and this is to help young farmers access that land. And it's through an easement purchase option contract. So Marbigco will help pay that fair market value in exchange for the farmer getting into a permanent conservation easement within 4 to 7 years. And then we've got a new program coming out, which, as you know, mal properties in the traditional next generation, you've got to have 50 acres or more. But we're seeing more farmers that need smaller acreage. So they created the small acreage program. So farmers who have a 10 to 49 acre farm are eligible to apply and conserve the property that way. And just to say, to date, Marbico's approved 44 projects, at $12,518,000, and with a total of 4,000 projects, acreage protected. And so we put the equity map in here. Biggest challenge for rural Maryland is accessing water. Majority of the Maryland's coastline is privately owned, and so there's a lot of residents that just do not have access to the water, even though they may live with less than a half a mile away. They're not going to be able to get to it. I have some stuff here on stewardship. We just want to make sure that and when we do preserve our land, that we are actively making sure that it is stewarded properly and keeping free of invasive pests, and that things are being managed appropriately. But we think this is overall, it's important for rural Maryland economic development, and just supporting of the program, and ask for the General Assembly for all cash funding. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Next, we have Jessica Leese of the Maryland Association of County Park and Recreation Administrators, and she is the Director of Anne Arundel County Park Recreation and Parks. Jessica? Jessica, you might be muted.
Sorry about that. Too many buttons to push. So good afternoon. My name is Jessica Lays, and today I would like to talk to you about the local program of open space funding on behalf of MACPRA, which is the Maryland Association of County Parks and Recreation Administrators. I'm also the director of Anne Arundel County's Department of Recreation and Parks. So the power in program open space from a local perspective is that it's a dedicated funding source that allows consistent acquisition and development of parks and recreational amenities across the state of Maryland. The power is that that promotes equity and investment statewide. It doesn't matter the size of our jurisdiction or our tax base. All of those biases are eliminated by a formula-driven funding source. It's not a competitive grant. Everybody gets an equal piece of the pie through the formula. Therefore, we can plan ahead and anticipate that funding. And it facilitates access for all. POS requires us to use all property that's acquired or developed with the state money to be open to the public, and that provides safe spaces for Maryland residents. I'm a big visual person, so this slide is showing you just some of the amenities that we use our program open space money for in the acquisition of natural areas for recreational use. To illustrate the importance and the history of program open space, I'm going to play a video that was created post-COVID, but is still very true today.
Maryland has a legacy of preserving our natural areas, waterways, and wildlife through program open space. Through the support of program open space, Maryland has protected over 394,000 acres of land that's an economic driver, that's crucial to mental and physical health of Marylanders. It contributes to climate resiliency and the overall quality of life of our state. With continued development and more people using the public areas during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're relying on you to fund this crucial program more than ever. Thank you for continuing this 50-year legacy for the generations to come. Maryland has
So the public benefits are obviously outlined in the beautiful pictures of the video. One of the things that the local jurisdictions within the state appreciate is the Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan, often called the LPPIP or the LIPRA. That identifies the needs based on equity, proximity, and demand. It is a requirement of local program open space so that we can plan ahead over the next 5 years to meet those needs that are identified. It's a data-driven decision, which makes it more fair and makes it more equitable, but also lets us have consistent funding and consistent planning for the future. It's a long-range plan that many of us counties wouldn't have without the LPPIP. The 2022 LPPIP identified over $2 billion of acquisition, development, and rehabilitation of park and recreational facilities statewide. Those needs are identified give us diversity in our parks and recreational amenities. The local jurisdictions, the counties and the cities use that money for natural preservation, for trails, for water access, for parks, for athletic amenities, playgrounds, recreational facilities, as well as environmental sustainable improvements and conservation of property. The reliable tool of Program Open Space allows us to keep up with that record high visitation that we're all experiencing to our parks, natural areas, and water access. Over 150% increase in measurable park use means that our parks are getting used more, but that has more wear and tear. That has more need for infrastructure investment, and Program Open Space helps us meet those needs. The demand has been met over the years with 6,900 Program Open Space grants awarded and over 50,000 acres protected. The public benefit is the power of Program Open Space to the residents within the state of Maryland. Local jurisdictions rely and appreciate on this partnership with the state in order to continue to make rec and parks the best place for all. Here you have pictures of what Program Open Space can do, renovating and using open farmland for recreational activities. But don't just take my word for it. These are just a few quotes that people come back to the counties and say when they go to one of our amenities and they see a trail or a playground or a safe space to be. It's the public that we serve, and it's Program Open Space that helps us serve them better and making a difference. Thank you for your attention this afternoon, and I hope that you've learned a little bit more about Program Open Space from a local perspective. But if not, in my presentation, I have all the contacts for the 23 counties in the state of Maryland that you can reach out to and ask them, how are you using our Program Open Space, to just understand how important it is to all of us on the local side.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jessica. Next, we have Joel Dunn. Joel is the president and CEO of Chesapeake Conservancy and is the co-vice chair of Partners for Open Space. Joel?
Thanks, Owen. And thank you, Jessica. It was great to hear directly from a county recreation leader. And you're doing such a great job at Anne Arundel, where my organization is headquartered. So I am the president and CEO of the Chesapeake Conservancy. I also have 2 little daughters who use the parks throughout the state and really benefit from them and get in touch with nature as a result, get some exercise. But thanks to all the legislators and staff who made it to this session today. We're really grateful for your time and interest in this important matter. It really impacts the quality of life of all Marylanders. You know, during the pandemic, as the video showed, people fell in love with their parks and playgrounds all over again. And Program Open Space makes those parks possible, from the Appalachian Mountains of Deep Creek Lake and State Park, or to suburban parks like Patapsco Valley State Park, or Sandy Point State Park, which now sees like 1 million visitors a year, to Maryland's Eastern Shore or Atlantic Ocean coastal parks like at Assateague State Park. So your time here is a good investment because it impacts so many Maryland residents. Just a note, I also co-convene the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership, which is a coalition of groups across the Chesapeake Bay watershed from New York all the way down to Virginia. And land conservation is a real priority across the Chesapeake Bay watershed. There's a real goal to preserve 30% of the land and water in the nation by 2030. So the focus on land conservation is in fact a watershed-wide priority. You might have noted that the EPA Bay program a month ago released some new statistics on how much land has been protected across the watershed, and that's 9.1 million acres. We still have 3 million to go to get to 30%. But I think it's important to think about this program in the context of the whole watershed. I've been a member of this steering committee, the Partners for Open Space, since 2010, having been the chairman or vice chairman during that time, various times. But this role, although it doesn't get lots of attention, it's probably the most important, or one of the most important, that I've fulfilled in my conservation career, because Program Open Space is such a profoundly important program and delivers such wonderful benefits. It was enacted with one simple but compelling and enduring goal. So as an acre of land is converted to development, an acre is conserved for program open space. And there have been periods where this goal's been achieved, and not, but that should really be our North Star for the program and for the state. And from its inception, the revenue was really divided 50% on the DNR or state side and 50% on the county side, including Baltimore City. And initially, DNR could use its share to only acquire lands for parks, forests, wildlife management areas, or natural resource management areas. And improvements to these lands and public access were paid for through the capital budget. And local governments could use their grants for land acquisition as in a percentage for improvements of those lands. Over the 5+ decades of this program, POS has proven to be really relevant, and its needs have been pursued, but there's been a number of additions and modifications to the program over time, including the mouth program, which we've talked about, and many other programs, which I'll talk about. But I did want to mention that the state uses something called the Green Print program to identify and target ecological areas. They're actually called targeted ecological areas. And those are focused on forest hubs and lands that preserve important species or maintain water quality. And there's a real science to how they prioritize their lands for acquisition. There's other priorities as well, as water access or historic conservation. But the demands on this program continue to increase. I'll give you a couple examples. About up to $7.5 million from Program Open Space now go to the Heritage Areas program, which is really important, but it's another draw. $6 million to retire general obligation bonds that were issued in 2009 that will be retired in 2026. Up to $8 million for Rural Legacy, which is always oversubscribed. $10 million as a direct grant to Baltimore City. And then there's the Green Space Equity Program, which will now receive up to $5 million in 2025. And I want to recognize the leadership of the House Environment and Transportation Committee and Regina Boyce for their strong support for the creation of the Green Space Equity Program. We're really excited about it. In addition, there's also the Great American Outdoors Act, which focuses on state parks and creating new ones and improving the ones we have. That's not to mention the big goal the legislature passed last year of preserving 30% of their land by 2030 and 40% by 2040. That's going to be a really important and challenging goal to meet. And so we need to sustain support for Program Open Space in order to get there. I know the Maryland Department of Natural Resources is working really closely with land trusts and local governments across the state to accomplish these collective goals. All that in total, and I'll wrap up by saying that the demands on Program Open Space funds will continue to grow, especially with population growth. People want access to open space, and we're also facing a confluence of challenges with biodiversity loss, wetland loss, and sea level rise due to climate change. So having this land acquisition, land conservation program is crucial to the future of Maryland. So I really urge everyone to continue supportful funding for the program and appreciate you taking the time to listen to the stateside perspective. Thanks, Owen.
Great. Thank you, Joel. I'll be finishing up talking about the heritage areas. So the heritage areas, the money that comes into these programs is essential. It's really helpful for helping to get a project over the finish line, or in some cases to get projects off the ground. It lends credibility to projects, and many of the applicants for heritage area projects are small grassroots groups and nonprofits. They create a strong program creating interpretation and presentation of untold stories. and brings those stories out into the public through projects like the Harriet Tubman Museum, Frederick Douglass Park, Chesapeake Heartland Project, the Kennard African American Cultural Center, the Hill Community Project in Easton, and Sumner Hall in Chestertown. Now, these are projects from just 2 of the 13 heritage areas throughout the state. And collectively, they have contributed $2 billion to our economy and have contributed over $319 million in local taxes. Annually, they create over 33,000 jobs. And since 1996, nearly 43 million in financial assistance has leveraged $1.6 billion in non-states funding. So this really shows the value and return on investment that the heritage area brings to our state. Now, we've heard from all these speakers today, and you've heard that there is a lot of demand for all these different programs and a lot of value. But there's by far more applications and more demand than there are funds available. Whether it's a Malvern Rural Legacy Program that receives more applications and funding they have available, the heritage areas only approve about 50% of the projects that come to them. As Jessica mentioned, the LPPRPs have showed that there's a $2 billion demand on our park system that were stressed during the pandemic, and that demand is not going away. The booming real estate market over the last few years has helped fueled program open space and overattainment funds. But we can expect less funds going forward as the housing market is cooled, and I think we can see that in this year's budget, which is an underattainment. But these programs are all thriving thanks to the continuation of funding and to the great staff at the Departments of Natural Resource, Agriculture, and Department of Planning, and the strong public-private partnership that have developed over the years, as other members of the Partners for Open Space can all attest. And as Joel mentioned, the Maryland the Beautiful Act has created a challenge to protect 30% of the state by 2030 and 40% by 2040. And thanks to Program Open Space, we are very close to achieving that 30 by 30 goal. But if we have any hope to achieving the 40 by 40 goal, we need to continue to fund this program. It won't get us across that 40 by 40 goal, but it will get us close to it. And so in closing, we've seen these well-established benefits and values brought to our communities because of Program Open Space or the transfer tax. There is a need to protect productive farmland in a changing climate. There's a need to protect contiguous tracts of land, whether it's farm, forest, or habitat. There's a need to meet our increasing demand for state and local parks and to make them more accessible. There's substantial economic benefit in our outdoor recreation and tourism economy. And there's huge community health benefits from safe and convenient access to the outdoors. And I think there's a responsibility to our heritage to continue to tell these untold stories and to make them more accessible. The benefits of Program Open Space continues to grow and are now more important than ever. So thank you all for attending. I will open it up for any questions that the group has. If you want to post your questions in the chat or raise your hand. We have time before the end of the hour to answer questions or take comments. Let's see. Right. Does anyone else from Partners for Open Space have anything to add? Delegate Boyce.
Thank you so much. Owen, I wonder do we know how many more kind of heritage spaces that we need to acquire, fix up, research to tell those stories?
That is a great question. I'll actually look to maybe Lucille Walker from Partners for Open Space to see if she can help me answer that.
Sure. Thank you for your excellent question, Delegate. I am the Southern Maryland National Heritage Area. I am both a state and national heritage area. And I also know that one of our administrators is on this call as well. The request that we get is close to $5 million more than we can fund every year for very worthy projects. So we don't have currently a list of all the heritage sites that we want to fund and stories that we want to fund, but we could certainly send you summaries because there's a lot out there that we really hope to participate in. We are able to fund a number of wonderful projects. It's just that with the 6 million, there's only so much that we can do.
Understood. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. There's a question in the chat on what is the budget for this year. I think the best person to answer that is Ann Jones. Ann?
It's a little hard to get it exactly what the budget is for each one of the programs. I can give a few that are very clear in the budget so far, but basically the transfer tax is so much less this year. I believe that the actual transfer tax was somewhere around 175 million. And this is me doing just extrapolation from like that thing called algebra, which I may have had a problem with on this. There was also an overattainment from previous years, so that was subtracted, and I think it's about 145 million that's coming down through all of these programs. So for instance, Rural Legacy is going to be budgeted, because it's a straight one line, at about 15 million this year, whereas last year it was about 33 million. And that's reflected on all of the programs. And the reason for that was two things. One of them was the overattainment, the underattainment from the time when the market did not tank during COVID. And then the second thing is a payback from the money that had been reallocated previously that was compressed into a one-year period that for those programs that was going to go out over a series. So last year was an anomaly. It will not be that FY24, that kind of funding is not going to come back. FY25 is going to be significantly less across the programs.
Great, thank you, Ann. I think it's also important to note that the program Open Space will see less funds this year as repayments come to an end, that Ann mentioned at the beginning, that $800,000 in repayments. Let's see, we have another question. What is the likelihood that these funds will be challenged this session? We never receive enough funding to do all the projects we have an interest in. That is a great question. That's not a question I'm in a position to answer. It is in the budget for this year, the proposed budget for this year. And do you have anything to add to that part?
I do not. Well, if I had a crystal ball and could told you what the legislator was going to do, I would do it right now. But hopefully we haven't heard any rumblings to that effect. And again, it is much less than it was in the past.
Yes. I have another question. How is the total divvied up for the programs? It's 30% to DNR at the top, and then the rest divided by how? That's also a great question. I know there is a formula that determines how the funds are divided. Again, Ann, I will look to you Ann is our guru on deciphering how the program is funded.
Which is very frightening, by the way. I think that I can get the formula to you. It's exceedingly complicated the way it comes down. I can always get mouth because 3% comes off the top for administration, then mouth is like 17% after that. And that is flat out, and that's where you figure out it's coming through as full cash funding. In terms of the heritage areas, that is a flat amount, not a percentage. So the percentage doesn't really apply to that one, which is when you have the flat areas, that's one of the things that looks a little bit off in the budget. The ones that are percentage are going to come down more when the transfer tax is lower. The ones that are a flat amount, such as $6 million to Baltimore City or $5 million to the Green Space Equity or whatever, they stay constant over the budget. And Michelle has pointed out that mouth is 17.05%. I skipped her 0.05% when I just gave the 17%. So I beg your forgiveness on that huge error there. But I also want to mention real quick that one reason why we talk a lot about full cash funding is there have been years in the past where the money went and it was going to be paid back at a later date, and it was paid for by bonds. And when you go into the bond sandbox to play, all of a sudden you're up against parks. I mean, not parks, pardon me. You're up against hospitals. You're up against schools. And there are a certain number of people that feel that capital budget should be going to bricks and mortar. And this isn't bricks and mortar. It can be on the local side, but a lot of this is land preservation. And that was a difficult thing to get over there at one point. But full cash funding is essential.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you, Michelle. Beth Carter has posted in the chat FY25 budget highlights for anyone who is interested. Seeing no more questions or comments in the chat, does anyone else have a question out there? You can raise your hand and ask it to the audience or the panel. All right. Hearing none, does anyone else have anything to add from Partners for Open Space? All right. Well, thank you all for your time. I know there is a hearing coming up at 3 o'clock, so we'll give you some time to get to that. Delegate Boyce, did you have anything to add before we sign off?
Happy, there I am. Happy third week and a half of session. So many more weeks to go. Looking forward to seeing and working with each and every one of you.
Great.
I hope I look the same by the end.
Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your time. Like I said at the beginning, we will be sending a recording of this out plus the slide decks to everyone who's registered. Have a good rest of your day.